those. A lot of the places we're going to still look like 1963. So I want you to have your cameras out to get pictures of these places. Now, one of the places that is mentioned on our tour is actually to our left. This red brick building here, just the red brick part. That is the old county jail. That is where Oswald was being transferred to. Now, once it's mentioned on our tour, we really can't see it. So I'm going to remind you about it then. Let me get past this car here. All right, so remember the red brick building to our left. I'm going to keep you in 1963 for the next hour. Were there any cell phones back then? No, so if you can take your cell phones out, put them on silent or vibrate for me, because when a cell phone rings, it takes us right out of 1963. All right, so let's go ahead and begin our recorded tour.
Folks, look to your right. This area, this is Dealey Plaza. And right here in Dealey Plaza, every day is November 22nd, 1963.
Now, first off, can everybody hear the recording?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. There is a common misconception about Dealey Plaza here. A lot of people think it was built as a way to honor Kennedy after the assassination. That is actually not true. They started planning Dealey Plaza in 1930 as a grand welcome to Dallas. At the time, Kennedy, he was only 13 years old. He was a little too young to be a U.S. president yet. Dealey Plaza was finished in 1940, so that was all there when President Kennedy came through. Now, for decades after the assassination, there was discussion back and forth about whether or not we should tear down Dealey Plaza. Because what city wants to be known as a city where a president was shot? It's an embarrassment, right? It wasn't until the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's shooting that it was decided to take Dealey Plaza and to restore it to be exactly like it was that day. So when we are following the motorcade route back through Dealey Plaza, you'll be seeing the exact same things that President Kennedy saw in the last few moments of his life.
People travel from all over the world to experience this. But if you want to get the best experience of what it was like to be here that unforgettable day in November, it helps to understand what life was like for President Kennedy and America in the early 60s. In 1963, civil rights was just getting started. President Kennedy introduced the very first civil rights bill. He was instrumental in bringing the civil rights to America. Also in the early 60s, the space race is just getting started. The Russians had launched a satellite called Sputnik, and the world was very surprised at how successful that launch was. And President Kennedy, he vowed that America would be the first to put a man on the moon. Also in 1963, communist aggression, it is spreading around the world. Most of Eastern Europe was forced into communism by the Soviet Union. And in October of 1962, President Kennedy has the Cuban Missile Crisis. America was on the brink of nuclear war. President Kennedy went on television and he gave the most frightening broadcast in American history.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
That was the atmosphere in 1963 here in America. Schools all across the nation routinely have bomb drills for their students. American homeowners were building underground bomb shelters as fast as they could build them. Americans were preparing for war. President Kennedy gave that broadcast in October of 1962. He told Americans, on the morning of November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy gave a speech outside the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth, and it was raining. But by the time the president landed in Dallas, the skies had cleared. It was a beautiful day, 68 degrees, and the weather determined if they were going to use the bulletproof bubble on the back of the limousine. President Kennedy flew in Air Force One from Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, and he landed at Dallas Love Field at 11:40 in the morning. The motorcade cars are Kennedy Blue, Lincoln Continental convertible limousines, and in the first car is the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, and his wife, Jackie. Also in the first car is the Governor of Texas, John Connally, and his wife, Nellie. But folks, Governor Connally, he is sitting ahead of the President in a jump seat that sets 3 inches lower and 6 inches to the left of the President, and that is a very important detail. And 2 cars behind is the Vice President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. So folks, 50 years ago, the President and the Vice President would travel together. They do not do that anymore. So folks, just before the Texas trip, Governor John Connally says to President Kennedy, "Mr. President, I don't think you should come down and do a stop in 5 cities. You just can't come down to Texas and ask people for their money. So why don't we just throw you a really big fundraiser in the capital, Austin? You'll make more money doing that than you will doing 5 small ones." But the Kennedys were very insistent, so it was set to go to Texas in November, to San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, Dallas, then Austin. Presidential motorcades are planned for every one of those cities. And President Kennedy did do motorcades in San Antonio, and in Houston, and in Fort Worth. But the motorcade here in Dallas, it was different. Because see folks, they haven't finalized all their plans. They don't know where they're going to have the fundraiser here in Dallas. The presidential motorcade in Dallas was not finalized until just 4 days before. Now folks, any of you guys know why Jackie Kennedy was on this Texas trip? You know, a lot of people at this point will say shopping. But folks, Mrs. Kennedy was not making personal appearances. She had lost her baby in August. But Mrs. Kennedy was just as big a draw as her husband was. At fundraisers, women, they flocked to her. And then those women went and told their very wealthy husbands, donate big to the campaign. So just before the Texas trip, President Kennedy says, "Jackie, I need you to come." It was the first time that Mrs. Kennedy had been seen in public in 9 months. Now folks, the presidential motorcade comes right down the street we're on right here, Harwood Street, but President Kennedy, he made 2 stops in between Dallas Love Field and downtown. The motorcade leaves Love Field at 11:50 in the morning. Does any of you guys know that he made 2 stops between Love Field and downtown? Here's what happened, folks. Up on those roads up there, the motorcade's traveling pretty quickly, about 45 miles an hour. LBJ and Governor Connally are both screaming, "Hey, we gotta hurry up and get to this fundraiser. We're doing 3 cities in one day." But the few people that were up on those roads had some signs holding them up that said, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." Well, folks, JFK was the kind of president, he wanted to be seen by everyone. So he said, "Driver, pull over." And he shook those people's hands. It was a group of Catholic nuns and a group of school children. Now, folks, right here is where they made their turn, coming up here on Main Street. And I want you to do the best job that you can do. Once I make this left-hand turn, look all the way down. Lean into the aisles if you need to. I'm going to set this scene for you. November 22nd, 1963. 50,000 people. A mob on both sides of the street. Every single window in downtown has a face looking out of it. Folks, presidents didn't come to Texas, but here was John F. Kennedy and his wife coming right down Main Street of Dallas. The nearest parking spot was 15 blocks away. And the Dallas police did the very best job they could do. They're at every intersection, and they're dispersed throughout this massive mob. But folks, this was bigger than the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. This was more electric than a Beatles concert. The people in Dallas went crazy. They came down here hoping, pleading, begging, just to get eye contact or a glimpse of the President and the First Lady. And every time President Kennedy waves, that big mob of people push against the police line and they come into this street, slowing the presidential cars down. But folks, if you'd have been here Friday, November 22nd, right here